All right, cats, bear with me here. Oklahoma is having another one of its bipolar weather fits, and even though I was in shorts last week, it is snowing on the way to work, so I'm going to be smart and safe here on my way in. I thought a lot about what I would cover this morning, and I was originally planning on reviewing Reacher Book 4, which I read a while ago, but the audio for that turned out poorly, so I'll have to redo that. But something came up earlier this evening, and I remembered that I didn't really review the Year of Sanderson from 2023, and I've got some opinions on that. So in 2022, we're looking back 2 years now. He announced this Kickstarter. It was a big surprise. It caught everybody by storm. It broke every Kickstarter record ever. I think the final gross in the end was north of $45 million in a month, which just goes to show you the loyalty and dedication of his reader base. You know, he'd been publishing at that point for, do the math, carry the two, 16 years. And he's an extremely hardworking and prolific writer. So, in those 16 years, he put out probably close to 3 times that number in novels, and I don't know if he's counting short stories with all that. The point is he's gotten a lot done, and these are not insubstantial pieces of epic fantasy. And your mileage may vary on the quality. I think that kind of just depends on the genre. He does his best work in the adult epic fantasy genre, but he's also dabbled in middle grade YA. He's done science fiction. He's done a little bit of everything. He's a very successful writer. There's a reason why he's gone on to be a university professor and kind of take up the mantle of the men that taught him back when he was going through school 20 years ago. So he knows what he's doing. He's not just one of these indie guys that then got really successful and let me just teach you how it all should be done, rather than just teaching us his way of doing it. He knows what he's doing, which makes it weird for me to want to criticize him, but based on how that experience was of reading all of the Year of Sanderson novels last year, I feel like I want to. It was weird. It was surreal. Like, I, for a very long time, was a Sanderson mega fan. I mean, I was there for the midnight drops for the books when I lived in Utah. I have a significant amount of first edition hardcovers by him that are autographed and numbered. Like, I was that guy, all right? And now here I am, all these years later, looking back and thinking, like, wow, I don't really have that zeal anymore. He's got a lot of series going, and if he writes another Mistborn, sure, I'll pre-order those ones and I'll be reading all those. That's my favorite series of his. But now looking back at 50 some odd novels he's published and thinking of the last at least dozen or so experiences I've had reading them, I would just want to say, like, I don't enjoy this stuff the way that I used to. Is it me or is it him? He announced this project in 2022. There were books that he'd already written during the lockdowns, and he was going to publish them himself. And, I was excited for the business implications of that. He was really showing his publisher, he's like, I'm my own thing. I don't need to do the trad pub thing. He still does because, he doesn't have any hostility towards them. But, he's a force in publishing, and especially in sci-fi publishing at this point. Like, he's not one that needs to have... Oh, that is a police officer. He's not one who needs to have like anything dictated to him. He's the one who does the dictating, and fortunately, he is a benevolent power holder. So he releases these books. Everybody's excited for them. Everybody trusts him. Everybody trusts his reputation. The first one comes out January of 2023, Tress of the Emerald Sea. And I read this one, and I was thoroughly entertained all throughout. I mean, I gave it a very well-deserved 4 stars over on Upstream at the end of it. I had a fun time. I thought it felt playful. It felt like, here was a guy who was writing a female protagonist, but he wasn't doing what, a lot of the mainstream corporate IPs try to do, where it's all, subversive and she don't need no man or whatever. Like, it was a woman in love. a young woman in love, and she goes to save her love interest Prince, who disappeared at sea, as it were. And, kind of like a Princess Bride plot. And he says in the afterword that it was inspired by that. He wanted to show her being, proactive. There was wit and comedy along the way, and it was all well and good. And right off into the sunset, happy ending, all that. Great, cool, good stuff. The second book was called like the Frugal Wizard's Guidebook or something. I can't even remember what the full title was. It was one of those, like, you look at the title and you can tell that it's gimmicky. This is a book that thinks it's funny. And when you're setting that expectation right out of the gate, you'd better live up to it or else. And I've got friends that freaking loved that book. I don't know if they were Sanderson Kool-Aid drinkers like I once was, or if they genuinely loved it. I don't know. Kind of up to them. I gave that one 2 stars. Predominantly because I didn't feel like it was as funny as it thought it was. And on top of that, the concept has been done before and has been done better. It's the amnesiac assassin type guy who suddenly gets dropped lit RPG style into ancient wizard era England, and he's trying to figure out who he was, finds out that he was a bad guy, blah blah blah. It took too long to get there. There was too much navel gazing and introspecting, and the twist and the reveal and all that stuff was not very satisfying. And by the time I got to the end, I was like, this was not good execution. And I was like, well, this isn't a Cosmere novel. This is the only of the 4 projects that isn't a Cosmere novel, and I have my own opinions about the Cosmere at this point. But, okay, whatever. They're not all going to be winners. Set that one aside. Another 3 months goes by, and out comes Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And this was one that, we'll say, if the entire Year of Sanderson project was, a pulling back the curtain to reveal something to me as a Sanderson devotee, this was the curtain getting pulled about halfway back. This was the beginning of my overall epiphany about the Cosmere, kind of specifically, and Sanderson's writing more, in general. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this comes in on the tail end of me refining my thoughts about lit RPG, because I think a lot of the mechanisms that he uses for writing and expressing the Cosmere overlap with the elements that I don't like about lit RPG, namely that it's over-reliant on exploring the mechanics of the game, or in the case of Sanderson and the Cosmere, over-reliant on exploring the mechanics of each individual world in the Cosmere, explaining the magic system and the setting to the nth degree, and then by the time it gets you there, you're a little bit too numb from statistical overload to really care about any of the dramatic impacts as they affect the characters. This was one such case. I gave Yumi and the Nightmare Painter 3 stars. It was better than the Frugal one. It wasn't as good as the Tress one. I was like, And this is where the other problem comes into play. It's kind of like what the whole, the Marvel Cinematic Universe did with its theatrical releases over the last couple of years, where it had these movies that were so dependent on Disney Plus streaming shows that if you didn't watch them, you didn't know half of what was going on. And I think we can safely say at this point that that kind of tie-in model has failed, as well as the whole streaming model at large has failed, unless your name is Netflix. But telling people that if they're going to spend $15 on a movie ticket, they need to have spent the monthly fee for a couple of months to watch 3 different shows that weren't very good in order to understand this 1 2-hour movie. That's not working for the MCU, and it's only working for a portion of Sanderson's reading audience as well. Granted, he's got enough committed Cosmere readers that he can get away with that. I've just discovered that I'm not one of them. And I kind of had to wake up to that, 5 or 6 years ago when the 3rd Stormlight Archive book came out. I got 7 hours into this 55-hour monstrosity, and I was like, this is really, really weird for me to say this, loving the Sanderson books as much as I do, but I don't care about this, and I don't want to care about this. I don't want to try to force myself to care about this. I'm out. And once I stopped caring about Stormlight and the 15 other books that were connected to Stormlight, and I just wanted to read, the Mistborn books, or maybe one or two other pieces that were tied to it, that was when I started to diverge from the larger Cosmere reader base. I know there are a lot of people who love it and who are committed to it. I would still like to be able to read a Cosmere novel and be able to grasp more than 90% of what's going on without having to do homework. I understand that in a sense, this is kind of the experiment that Sanderson has taken on with the Cosmere, writing several series that run parallel, that have some overlapping characters that happen on different worlds out in this fictional space. This planet happens here, this planet has this stuff over there, there's a guy who can hop between planets, there are portals, there are whatever. I think that is a cool concept, but I'm not so committed to, reading that much, like taking a percentage of what I read every year and saying, okay, 25% of the 120 titles that I'm going to read are going to be Sanderson. Like, it's too restrictive. I would have to commit too much of my imagination capacity, my RAM, we'll say, to just keeping track of this massive, expansive world. And this is, I think this is the linchpin of it all. This is the keystone to the entire thing. On the whole, it's not that good. And 10 years ago, I would have never said that out loud, I don't think. But I was such a Sanderson superfan that was just never going to happen. But I've read enough of these at this point that I don't think I'm wrong to say that. I don't think it's that good. I don't think that his comedy chops are what they once were. Or maybe they're all the same and I've just outgrown them. That's possible. I read my first Sanderson book when I was 23. I am now 39. All right? It's a third of my life, at least. The years have chipped away, life experiences have happened, and I've just kind of outgrown certain elements of his style, which is to be expected. Nevertheless, this is the Graham Bradley channel. This is about Graham Bradley's reading experience with the Cosmere, and my experience is that I'm just kind of spent on it. And it was ultimately the fourth book in the Year of Sanderson experiment, the Sunlit Man, that helped me to realize that. I was like, wow, it took me a second to see what the model was, but there's a formula to these one-off Cosmere books, and it happens with almost all of them. It's here's the setting, and this is true of Elantris, this is true of Warbreaker, this is true of the first Mistborn trilogy, this is true of the two Stormlight books that I read from the beginning to end. This didn't really happen so much in Tress. It was definitely a component of Yumi, and it was for sure a component of the Sunlit Man. All of these books, keep this in mind, this has happened the same with all of these. Here is a setting where something about the mechanics of the world is broken. In Elantris, the magic was broken. In Warbreaker, similar thing, the magic was broken. In Mistborn, the entire world was broken. There was the volcanoes, there was the ash falling from the sky. All of it. This is the same way. And then you got a plucky protagonist who's in the middle of all this, but kind of above it, kind of unaffected by it, or at least, is able to run counter to it, and then finds out that they are special. They can be the chosen one. Sometimes they choose to be the chosen one. They choose to look at the world in a different way, and they figure out what the mechanics are along the way. You get a couple of epic magic fueled kung fu style fights, guest appearance by Hoyd / Wit / whatever the hell his name is, and then this is the key part, like the mechanics of the world get fixed. You solve whatever problem that people have gotten very, very comfortable with, and then you kind of wait to be folded into the larger Cosmere narrative, probably having to do with characters in the Stormlight series. And in the Sunlit Man, in this case, it was, the planet rotates really, really close to a sun or something. Basically, like, there are these massive, gnarly heat intervals that the planet is constantly cooked by, and people have to live in the Goldilocks zone between, the sunlight, which they can't live in the hot zone directly. It would cook them, but they can't go too far into the shadow zone. It's too cold. They wouldn't be able to grow crops, things like that. So they basically have to live in these giant city ships that are moving with the Goldilocks zone, and sometimes there are caves that you can hide in, blah, blah, blah. A character comes along, fixes it. Like, I'm not so connected to the Cosmere as a reader anymore that I cared to really slug it out with another 12, 13 hour audiobook and, track who is actually what from what other world and does X, Y, Z and this, that, and the other thing. It's too much. When you can take a 12-hour book and you've got to connect it to 60 hours of other content for me to really understand the full ramifications of what's going on, you've spread the web too far. It's butter pushed across too much bread, in a sense. You're giving me the Hobbit trilogy when really the Hobbit was only worth one movie. That's where I'm at. I'm waiting for more Mistborn. From what I understand, that was supposed to be a trilogy of trilogies. I guess he'll get to them when he gets to them. Word on the street is he's working on the 5th Stormlight right now. And my wife loves those books. She's rereading them in anticipation for the 5th one coming out in December. It's all well and good. And I've had these discussions with her, and it's just like, I tell her what it is that I liked and why I can't keep reading on these. There are other big series that I want to tackle. And maybe it's a thing that's peculiar to me because of the volume of what I read, but I'm just not going to commit so much of my annual reading time to internalizing and tracking all that, especially because at the end of the day, it's all made up. And I ingest such a high volume of nonfiction and history and stuff that's a lot more relevant to my day-to-day life that... I'd like to be entertained and maybe uplifted and enlightened a little bit by the fiction that I read, but I don't want it to be so demanding of me that, it pulls me so far out of the real world and I've got to start keeping track of this magic works this way and this guy was over here and this planet does this and this lady and blah, 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 blah. I'm not that reader. I no longer am, and it feels good to say that out loud. So... to all the Sanderson fans who are listening and, hopefully this is still recording. Yep, no glitches there. 18 minutes of this. I wish you well. If you guys are enjoying it, great. Good for you. But, whether it's Cosmere or not, I'm pretty much only interested in Mistborn from here on out. I tried reading the 4th Cytonic book. And I got about a quarter of the way through it and was like, I don't care. Kind of like the Cosmere, even though I don't think it's a Cosmere type story. It's too bloated and there's too much navel gazing, and you've got characters who like to stand around for scores of pages at a time and navel gaze and overthink things and make sure that they're addressing every possible editor note that somebody might give to Sanderson so that whatever course of action they take, they know that they've eliminated every other course of action before choosing to take this one. It's kind of soulless. Yeah, I think that's what it is in the end. So that's my 2 cents. I'm roundabout way of saying it, but in true Sandersonian fashion, I took way longer than needed to be taken to say in the end what I meant to say, and that's that I'm checked out. I wish you guys the best, but it's not going to be such a huge part of my reading bandwidth going forward. There's too much good stuff out there, and I want to keep casting a wide net. All right, thank you everybody for listening.